Tell the feeling like I'm trapped in my damn mind. Tell the feeling like I'm rapping a damn lie. Tell the feeling like my life is a damn game. Nigga really wanna die in the night time. Only time I feel pain when I'm feeling low. That's why I tell it on my face that I'm down low. Only time on my mind when I'm all alone. That's why I'm never really alone in the night time.
Welcome back everybody to KENAN TV. In this episode of a fantasy series, we will be taking a closer look at what if Tony Ferguson defeats Khabib the Eagle Nurmagomedov. How could Tony do it and what could be happening afterwards? Obviously, assuming right now we have Dustin Poirier going into a fight with Khabib. He is the interim champion and most likely, and as it should be, he is probably the next and set contender. But you never know in the fight game. Dustin Poirier may not be able to make the fight and we may have another Colby Covington situation on our hands. So only in that way could I see a fight between Tony Ferguson and Khabib Nurmagomedov happening before the Dustin Poirier fight. That is the only real logical explanation I could give you guys for it. But other than that, this is mainly a fantasy matchup because right away this is not a fight that will be happening. Because at the same time we have Conor McGregor looking for a fight and most likely he will be going in there and fighting Tony Ferguson, number 2 versus number 1. The interim champion versus the undisputed champion. You can kind of compare this to a tournament. But with that being said, let's jump right into what if Tony Ferguson defeats Khabib Nurmagomedov. Before we get there, we have to analyze how he could do it. Tony Ferguson without a question is the better striker. He has the better footwork, he has more output, he has more versatility in his output, and is all around a predominant striker. One thing that Tony Ferguson likes to do is always come forward. He is always the fighter who can come forward, put the pressure on you, and just chop you down piece by piece. Nothing too powerful, nothing too serious. He's always very calculated, stands his ground pretty firmly, and starts to walk you down and break you down. And more so than ever, I think that we have seen guys like, for example, Conor McGregor, who are very hard hitters, very precise, very quick hitters, who weren't really the type of guys to defeat Khabib. Whereas Conor McGregor relied on a lot of people walking in onto his traps, walking in on his left hand, walking into his baits that he put out there. And that didn't really seem to work because Khabib, he is a fighter who takes the outside of the cage. He is a fighter who doesn't mind being the guy who's on the outside of the cage, rather it be by just doing this temporarily to a point where he can get the fight to the center of the octagon, to a point where he can shoot him for a single leg and drive the opponent against the cage. From there he does what he does, takes the opponents down, and it's all game over from there. But against a fighter like Tony Ferguson who comes forward and is controlled, persistent, consistent, versatile, that is going to be something that Khabib hasn't really dealt with all that much. For example, Al Iaquinta, when the fight started off with him and Khabib, he was able to back up Khabib just for the opening of the fight. When it comes to Conor McGregor, he was able to do the same thing. But what, for example, Al Iaquinta lacked was versatility. When it comes to Conor, I believe that he just overcommitted a bit too early. He just planted his feet a bit too much, didn't show too much respect to Khabib, and he just went out there and just tried to blast him out of there. So when it comes to Tony Ferguson, who is always calculated, smart, and always puts the pressure on his opponents, I would have to believe that in the opening of the fight, Khabib will probably be backed up against the cage, and from there, it is going to be pretty interesting how he's going to deal with somebody like Tony Ferguson in terms of the versatility and the size. Keeping in mind that he is 1 inch taller than him and has a 6.5 inch reach advantage over Khabib Nurmagomedov, Tony Ferguson will probably be out of range for any potential Khabib Nurmagomedov explosive right hand overhand, which in return will probably mean that he will be able to pick him apart and make Khabib Nurmagomedov actually feel like him being up against a cage is not always going to be something that he can implement or be comfortable with. And I can draw a couple similarities between, for example, him and Tyron Woodley. And another similarity I want to draw is just Tyron Woodley's fight with Kamaru Usman and this possible matchup where we have Khabib Nurmagomedov. We can compare him to Tyron Woodley in the sense of that Woodley was never a complete striker. He used explosiveness and timing to get off big shots, and he used his size to push his opponents back and be the better grappler, stronger grappler. Another thing that they both do is the fact that they were both backed up, whether it was by preference or inability to provide something to prevent them being pushed back against the cage. For example, when it comes to Tyron Woodley, he takes the outside of the cage, he circles around and looks for his big right hand. When it comes to Khabib Nurmagomedov, it's more so to get out of the range and get the fight back into the center of the octagon where he can get the takedown and go from there. If we compare Kamaru Usman with Tony Ferguson, we have two pressure fighters who are known for their output, consistency, not so much for their great power, but just the all-around fact that they can go in there and just piece by piece break down their opponents. Now obviously one big difference between them is that Kamaru Usman is a lot stronger. He has a way better wrestling background, and he was able to mix up his striking with his wrestling against Tyron Woodley. We won't be really having that in the Tony Ferguson versus Khabib matchup, and that will be something that will be enabling Khabib Nurmagomedov to have a lot more success than, for example, Tyron Woodley had, because Tyron Woodley had to defend his striking and also Kamaru Usman's wrestling. Whereas when it comes to Tony Ferguson pressuring Khabib in the opening of the fight, for example, he only has to worry about the striking. So it is only a matter of time, in my opinion, until Khabib finds a certain pattern to get away from Tony Ferguson's pressure and to get the fight where he wants it to be, which is the ground department. And when it comes to the ground game, we have something that Tony Ferguson makes up for his wrestling, and that is his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and his activity from the bottom. From the bottom, Tony Ferguson is probably a fighter that a lot of people seem to underestimate. For example, Kevin Lee, when he took him down, he did not expect a lot of those elbows to come at him, and certainly the activity that Tony Ferguson presented on Kevin Lee. And we haven't really seen many fighters who could go in there in the ground game, wrestling department, and actually put up a fight against Khabib. More so, it was always them defending, and it was only just stalling the inevitable. If you fight fire with fire, then I believe you have a chance against Khabib Nurmagomedov's ground game, especially if your name is Tony Ferguson.
I have these lucid dreams where I can't move a thing, thinking of you.
And arguably, Tony's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the best and the most effective in the lightweight division. A lot of people, like for example RDA, who have a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they for example couldn't really do a lot. But when it comes to Tony Ferguson, he's a fighter who is active, knows how to do MMA BJJ, and that is something that not a lot of people get in the lightweight division, in my opinion. Add on top Tony Ferguson's stamina and endurance, it will be a question of, can Khabib Nurmagomedov tire out Tony Ferguson? Because seemingly in the 4th and 5th round for Khabib Nurmagomedov, as he showed in the Ali Quinta fight, his takedown attempts or pushing through on takedowns seem to diminish by that point. And when it comes to Tony Ferguson, there is seemingly no slowing down when it comes to him. So in the end, Tony Ferguson's way to a victory is not all that unrealistic. I think that Tony Ferguson possesses tools that will fight fire with fire and provide antidotes to Khabib Nurmagomedov's weaknesses. For example, when Khabib is being pressured, that is the area where Tony Ferguson exceeds at. And when it comes to the ground game, that is an area where Khabib exceeds at. But then again, Tony Ferguson in that area is not a slouch. So it's going to be pretty interesting. I think that Tony Ferguson has a great chance of defeating Khabib. But assuming that he defeats Khabib, whether it be a submission, unanimous decision, or a TKO, where would he go from there? Immediately, the first thought that comes into my mind is that if Tony beats Khabib, will we give Khabib an immediate rematch? Does he deserve it? I would have to believe so. He deserves an immediate rematch because of the fact that he has never been defeated. Depending on how the fight plays out, obviously, if it is a competitive fight, if it is a fight where Khabib was dominating and all of a sudden he gets KO'd, then I believe there should be a rematch. But if it was a close fight where Tony Ferguson was always one step ahead of him, I would have to believe that we have to step him aside and let the interim champion Dustin Poirier, because keep in mind, in this parallel universe, if you will, we have Tony Ferguson skipping over Dustin. So then we're going to have Dustin Poirier versus Tony Ferguson. That is an interesting fight. We have Dustin Poirier, who is a good counter puncher on the back foot, who is a hard puncher for the division, good boxing, good movement, good leg kicks, going up against a fighter who will still always come forward at him. And I will have to believe that against Tony Ferguson, an area in his game, especially in his striking game, is the fact that he tends to just be a bit too quote-unquote sloppy, right? He tends to get hit, he tends to get dropped, he tends to be the guy that some may say has a glass chin. I don't really believe so. I think that he more so gets dropped because of the fact that he's out of position, out of balance, or it's just in situations where he shouldn't be, and when he does get hit, it just looks like it did more damage than it actually did. But when it comes to Dustin, I think that Dustin has a great chance of defeating him as well. I think Dustin is well-rounded enough, but I would have to believe that Tony Ferguson has a size advantage and has I think enough lightweight experience and has seen enough styles to go in there and fight Dustin and beat him. I believe early on in that fight, Dustin will put up a great fight. Maybe the first 3 rounds it will be a competitive fight where both could probably win a round or 2, but in the end, in the 4th and 5th round, I would have to believe that Tony Ferguson will have to pull through. And then if he beats Dustin Poirier, we gotta have a fight between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Conor McGregor. That should be the rematch. If Conor McGregor hasn't fought by that point, I would like to see that fight for an interim belt. Just why not? Just slap on an interim belt on there, make it a bigger fight. Who cares? And in that fight, I would have to believe that Conor McGregor will put up a lot of a tougher fight against Khabib, but in the end, I would have to believe that Khabib Nurmagomedov will still find a way to get the fight to the ground and will still find a way to get the submission victory, making Khabib the interim lightweight champion in this parallel universe. Only then could we have a Khabib Nurmagomedov rematch, and in the rematch, really, only time will tell. For now, this has been What If Tony El Cucuy Ferguson defeats Khabib the Eagle Nurmagomedov. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you guys are new. As always, I have been Kenan from Kenan KTV, signing off. Later.